Okay, it's 6 o'clock. It's ready to roll. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jan Bedane. I'm the Voter Services Chair for the League of Women Voters of Western Nevada County, and I welcome you all here tonight, and thank you for coming. I want to also thank our candidates. They are all going to be introduced. Okay, how's this? Thanks. I'd also like to thank our media partners tonight, the Union, UBNet, and KNCO, and also special recognition to Nevada County Media, who is streaming this live and who makes our official film available. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. It's good to have a backup. So this is streaming now live, but we will have an official video of this, and it will be made available on the League's website, www.LWV. I'm going to talk really loud.
Here, Jan, do you want to use this? Huh? Do you want to use this?
I'm not. I'm going to be more civilized. I fooled you. So anyway, the video will be available on our website and also on our Facebook page and on Nevada County Media as well. This is a bit of a mouthful, as I've said before, but I want to recognize that our forum series is being helped with funding from the Nevada County American Rescue Plan Act allocation for community and economic resiliency. We nickname it the Resiliency Grant, and it went out to many nonprofits that have really been able to sustain our community throughout these last couple of years, but which have taken quite a hit. So we appreciate the funding from the county, and it is the reason why we're here tonight, why we're able to bring this to you. Let's see, we have two more forums coming up. On tomorrow night, we've got State Assembly. And on Thursday night, we've got the assessor. So please come back. Send us questions in advance if you'd like for those. We do need them pretty soon. So you can send them to info@lwvwnc.org. I'm going to turn it over to our moderator tonight. Our moderator is League member Marcia Birch, and I leave it to you.
Thank you, Jan. Good evening and welcome to the Candidates Forum for the Nevada County Clerk, Recorder, Registrar of Voters. I am Marcia Birch and I will be moderating tonight. This evening we are presenting candidates to hold the office for Nevada County's Clerk, Recorder, Registrar of Voters. And I'm going to briefly describe that office because it's a lot what that office covers. Generally, the duties of the office include issuing marriage licenses, filing fictitious business name statements, processing notary bonds, and performing civil marriage ceremonies. The office also issues certified copies of marriage, birth, and death records. The recorder maintains various land and finance documents for the county, such as mining claims, subdivision maps, and records of survey. Typical finance documents include trust deeds, reconveyances, and liens. In the role of Registrar of Voters, this office registers Nevada County voters and maintains the county's voter registration file, conducts federal, state, and local elections held in the county, files candidates' campaign statements, and performs various other duties related to elections. So there's a lot going on in this office. There are 3 candidates running for this position of Nevada County Clerk, Recorder, Registrar of Voters. We have Paul Gilbert, Jason Tedder, and Natalie Adona. Tonight, the candidates will begin with opening statements, and then we will move to questions that each will have an opportunity to answer. Audience questions can be printed on the index cards available in the lobby and also from our card runners. So our card runners will maybe raise a hand right now. So the card runners are here and they'll be stationed around the room. throughout the forum, and they'll be collecting your questions. So when you have a question ready, you can raise your hand, or if you need a card, you can raise your hand and they'll bring one to you. Please ask questions that all of the candidates can answer. So not a question that would be personal to one of the candidates, and no personal questions either. We do have card readers who are going to be any duplicate questions. So a lot of times in this situation, we get a lot of the same questions, so they'll be taking those out, and also anything that we would consider to be personal. To help the screeners, maybe keep your questions as short as possible, to the point, and also legible, because they're reading that right here tonight in real time. It's very unlikely we're going to get to all of the questions, so if your question doesn't get asked, I'm sorry about that, but we're probably not going to get to all of them. The candidates, well, we also have, I just want to introduce, just let you know that we have some media here tonight, and they will be posing questions as well. We have from KNCO, Chris Gilbert. From UBNet, we have Pascal Fusoler, and from the Union, Rebecca O'Neill. The candidates will have 2 minutes for their opening and closing statements, and 1.5 minutes to answer each of the questions. They also will have an opportunity for rebuttal, and I'm going to ask the candidates, if you do ask for rebuttal, there's a 1-minute rebuttal, and you need to keep it to the topic of the original question, if at all possible. That's, the point of the rebuttal is to rebut within the context of that question. And then if there is a rebuttal, each candidate will then have 1 minute to respond to the rebuttal. So the candidates will alternate in the order of answering questions. We drew straws a few minutes ago to decide who would speak first. And I'd like to say that tonight, courtesy is really the order of the evening. The candidates are going to allow one another to finish and not interrupt when the other candidate is speaking. And from the audience, we ask that you hold your applause. And I know this is hard because you might hear something that you really want to acknowledge, but we're going to hold our applause to the very end. It's important that we allow the candidates to have enough time to respond, and if we're having applause between everyone, that's not going to work out. Please refrain from outbursts. In other words, please do not cheer, boo, hiss, stomp, or shout out. We have provided a nonpartisan setting for undecided voters to hear all positions, so any demonstrations of support or opposition to the candidates or their positions will be considered out of order tonight. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones if you haven't done that. At the end of the evening, we will thank the candidates with our applause, and that'll be at about 7:30 tonight. We're going to end at 7:30. So now it's time to meet the candidates for Clerk, Recorder, Registrar of Voters. Based on the drawing of the straws, our first candidate to give an opening statement will be Paul Gilbert.
Well, hello, good evening, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this event and inviting me. I'm Paul Gilbert, and I'm running for this office because of Natalie Adona. Natalie, you may remember when we first met, it was September of last year. I was dropping off some paperwork to keep some citizens compliant with the state law, and you refused to accept the paperwork. I told you on that day that I was going to be auditing the election. And then you spoke to a reporter from the union and slandered me and returned libeled me by them putting it in print. You called my business a fraud and a scam. I sent you a notice, and Mr. Diaz, and the county council, and to the union regarding this slander and libel. The union retracted the story and issued an apology, but I heard nothing from you. Crickets. Make more noise. After I had acquired all the voter history rolls that I was seeking, I filtered the data, and I found some very disturbing data. I found hundreds upon hundreds of people who haven't voted in years. Some of these people have been on the voting rolls for over 25 years after they have moved. This indicates a problem that needs to be addressed. The audit also revealed that 1,375 ballots were returned in the 2020 election as a direct result of the vote-by-mail program. Again, another indicator that we have a problem. The vote-by-mail program exposed another problem, which is known as voter already voted. This is a major problem that needs to be addressed. This is why I'm running, so that we can tackle these problems that have been exposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Jason Tedder.
Hello, and thank you. I'm Jason Tedder, and I'm running for this office. And before I start, I just want to thank my wife. She has been my best friend for 13 years, and my wife for 10, and my amazing little girl, Dagny, who's going to be turning 5 in a couple days. I'm very blessed. And this job that I'm about to embark on is not so much for myself, but very much for them and for the rest of you. I'd also like to thank the League of Women Voters so much for providing us this opportunity to get together and talk and let you guys get to know who we are. This is a big county and we're really spread out, so this is a treat and, like I said, an opportunity, and I appreciate that. My grandparents moved here back in the late 70s. My family followed soon in the early 80s. I've lived here ever since, and this is my home, my beloved home. And I'm here to serve my community as I always have. One of the things that I think when I think about Nevada County is that we've always been an eclectic mix of people. You talk about the hippies up in North San Juan or the ranchers and farmers down in Penn Valley. We are a real melting pot, and we always got along. That doesn't happen so much. There's a lot of political division and strife between neighbors, and it breaks my heart as someone who's dedicated to serving this community. And I know this is indicative of a larger problem in our country, but I don't have a lot of control over that. I do have control of what's going on in my own backyard. So that's why I'm here, to do this, to mend this one part of division, to hopefully instill in you the trust that many have instilled in me, to be a good and honest person who can deliver honest and fair elections to everyone, absent of my own political views and opinions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Natalie Adona.
Thanks so much, and good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many people out here. My name is Natalie Adona. I am your Assistant County Clerk Recorder, and I am running for the office of Clerk Recorder. So you're going to hear a lot tonight about our qualifications. You're going to hear a lot tonight about the process of elections, much of which you might know, some of which you might not be familiar with. But what I want to talk about actually is sort of the issues that election officials face. And I would argue that what we face is not really a problem with process. The process has worked well in 2020, and will continue to work well. It worked well in the United States. We had 95% of ballots cast on paper across this country, more audits than ever were conducted, more post-election litigation that confirmed the results, and federal agencies, state agencies all saying that the 2020 election was secure. Our own Nevada County Grand Jury report said, and I quote, "Based on the 2020 presidential general election, Nevada County voters should have confidence in their elections officials. They're competent, knowledgeable, and concerned about ensuring a smooth election." So really, this is not about process. What this is about the diminution of faith in our democracy. And I like to compare democracy to a beautiful tapestry. It's delicate, and if you pull on a thread, it can fray. Election officials really help keep that tapestry from coming apart with professionalism, nonpartisan, deep understanding and knowledge and experience of public administration and the law, and applied knowledge. That is what I have to offer you, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the questions, and we're going to start with a media question, and we'll go left to right. We'll start with KNCO.
Good evening, candidates. And just want to start off with what are your thoughts on the vote-by-mail system and its impact on voter participation?
Can you repeat that again?
Yes, what are your thoughts on the vote-by-mail system and its impact on voter participation?
I'm getting some feedback in my ear. I'm sorry. I don't know if it's the location of that. Can you try again? I'm sorry.
Just your thoughts on the vote-by-mail system.
Oh, vote by mail. Yes, vote by mail. Ha ha ha. That's a really loaded question. The vote by mail program has exposed many flaws in our voting system. The first of which is our voter rolls are inaccurate. We had 1,375 ballots returned as undeliverable. So why is our voter roll that inaccurate? It also exposed the voter already voted problem, where 2 ballots are being presented for a single voter. I personally believe that it should be eliminated and we return to in-person voting. We can still have the absentee ballot. That's still a necessary piece, but in-person voting, no more of this blanket vote by mail. It's too rife with fraud.
Well, we'll go in order, and when each candidate is finished, if you would like rebuttal, you can raise your hand and we'll go down that route. Okay. Did he still have more time? Yes. Paul, please go ahead.
Okay. In my audit of the voter rolls, again, the vote by mail program just is introducing too much opportunity for fraud. Like I said, the voter already voted. We had plenty of instances in the recall election where people were being told that, sorry, you've already voted, when they're walking in and they've got the original ballot that was delivered to them by the county. And so we really do need to address that problem. There needs to be better security. Chain of custody is the only way to describe it. Other people can easily get another copy of your ballot in there, and once that happens, then your vote's not going to count, no matter what the rules say is going to happen.
Thank you. Mr. Tedder.
Thank you. I think mail-in ballots have proved a useful way to give accessibility to voters that may not feel comfortable going to the polls or unable to go to the polls. I think it's a part of the system that should and ought to be included. I think that, however, is though that we need to make sure that there is a proper chain of custody, that these ballots are monitored at all times correctly with extra safeguards. I also think that it leaves opportunities for ballots that are being mailed out en masse for people to collect them and illegally cast votes. And so maintaining accurate voter rolls is absolutely imperative to keeping our vote by mail system secure. I think that it's one of those things that probably isn't going to go away. And as an elected official, I'm beholden to the people and what they want. And right now, the state of California has voted to have these. So until they've decided to change that, I have to honor that request. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Adona.
Thank you. So I would like to, share one, I think, important statistic. Before Nevada County went to the Voters' Choice Act, about 80% of voters were already voting by mail. And when Nevada County moved to the Voters' Choice Act in 2018, everybody got a ballot by mail. So it's already sort of proven to be a convenience for people. And in particular, vote by mail, I agree with Mr. Tedder. It does help people who can't otherwise show up in person. In particular, our voters who are in the military and live overseas and who have a right to vote. So, I think that there is a rigorous chain of custody that we maintain in our office, and we have a 2-person rule. No one can be alone with a ballot. We verify all signatures, and in fact, all of those envelopes have a vote by mail ID on them. So if there is ever a question about how many ballots that someone has requested, we know under the law you can only ask for 3. And honestly, it has increased turnout in our county, and it will probably increase turnout across the state now that every registered and active voter will get a ballot by mail in the state of California. I will save my comments on voter list maintenance for my rebuttal, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we'll go ahead with the rebuttal now. You'll have 1 minute, and then each of the other candidates will also have a minute.
Sure. I mean, I just wanted to sort of very quickly address the citizen auditor's report and give Mr. Gilbert the opportunity to hear my answer. And, you know, the auditor's report does talk a lot about list maintenance. And, you know, I just had, you know, a couple of questions about that report that I found interesting. For example, I mean, the data analysis is unlike any other I've ever seen in my years of research. It's comparing two unlike things and asking why there's a discrepancy. I think the discrepancy is explained by our office's voter list maintenance activities. I also wonder why there's a frequent reference to the Help America Vote Act when actually the federal law that governs voter list maintenance is the National Voter Registration Act that tells states how to conduct their list maintenance, which is clearly laid out in Division 2 of the California Elections Code. So hopefully that answers any questions that the citizen auditors may have, but you're always welcome to come to my office and ask more.
Thank you. Do the other candidates wish to have rebuttal? Yes, Mr. Gilbert.
Okay. Yeah, on the rebuttal there, I do recall it the HAVA. That is actually, I should be more precise in that. It is a collection of laws, the Civil Rights Acts from the 1960s, the National Voter Registration Act, as well as the Help America Vote Act of 2002. And it's through those three acts that we have why we have electronic voting and the registration requirements and all that. There's a whole lot of rules in there. And when she talks about the various analysis of the data, I'm not going to focus on the 2020 election itself, but just on the voter rolls. And from that, I was able to take a query of the data and find data that, 722 voters that have not voted since 2012. They haven't updated their registrations. There's been minimal contact between the voters' elections office and those people. And again, this is a problem. It has to be addressed. And hopefully we can get these issues addressed during the course of the next year.
Thank you. Mr. Tedder, would you like rebuttal? Okay, well, we can move on to the next question. And again, I'm going to stagger the beginning for the question, and so Mr. Tedder, you will respond first. What prior working experience qualifies you to be the clerk, recorder, registrar of voters, and why?
So my experience is in leadership. And this is absolutely a leadership position. The clerk recorder requirements for office are that you are 18 years of age, a legal resident of the county, and a registered voter, and that you simply, oh my gosh. I went through a lot of different kinds of organizations where I was in charge of huge programs and had many people under me, where I learned to manage them with respect and dignity and appreciation. People of all diverse backgrounds, men, women, nationals from other countries. This is what the fundamental part of this office is. Being able to learn. The job is the secondary part. The job is not something that you go to college for. You don't get a BS in clerk recorder. This is something that you learn on the job. And I have many years, whether it being an electronics technician or a computer science technician, working in the trades, going to law school, studying all the things that I have, really will benefit my leadership and my ability to understand all the different facets of the office. And so I hope that you realize that, the essence of this thing, oh, sorry.
Thank you. Ms. Adona.
Thanks so much. I'm proud to say that I have 14 years' experience in elections and voting, and that would include my time in the clerk recorder's office as the assistant since 2019. When I started my career, it was as a poll worker trainer, and that was back in 2008. If you remember, there was a little thing where the economy kind of tanked, and governments weren't hiring. So I sort of quickly pivoted my career toward elections and voting research. And in the sort of last job that I had, I sort of managed a big grant program for elections research. So part of it was sort of research-based, and part of it was on the track of grant making. And then I heard about Nevada County, and I'm like, oh, wow, it's really beautiful here. So, I scooped up this job, and luckily I was hired. While I've been here, we've administered elections in 2019, 2020, 2021, and here again in 2022. I'm also, a recognized leader in the state. I'm a recognized leader nationally. I'm a member of several task forces and advisory boards, including those from the Bipartisan Policy Center, the Election Official Legal Defense Network, the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials, and the Journal of Election Administration Research and Practice. And I think it's prepared me quite well for this job. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert.
Yes. Well, my career has been a long and varied one. In my early 20s, I opened my first business. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an engineer. I like to solve problems when they're presented to me. I worked in the corporate world for many years with increasing responsibilities until such time I was a senior consultant, and I was working for a public electric utility industry. And one of my primary responsibilities was obviously being responsible for all the data that they had, but also reporting to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And this was a duty I took very seriously because I understand the critical infrastructure that the electric transmission industry represents. Outside of that, I've been retired. I've enjoyed my time working in my garden. And one day, somebody said, we've got some problems with the elections, and I need your help. And so, as a result, I became an entrepreneur again, and I opened up my business, Citizen Auditors, to help other citizens audit and investigate the elections office, as well as government in general. Working with budgets, I was responsible for $1 million budgets. Managing people, I was responsible for upwards of a dozen engineers, technicians.
Thank you. So we'll go to another media question. We'll take a question from Ubinet, and Ms. Adona, you'll be the first responder on this question.
Good evening, candidates, and thanks for running for office. It's important to, public service is very important. You talked a lot about the election portion of the office. I would like to hear your thoughts on the registrar side, which is also part of this office. There is a lot of automation that has already taken place, but how would you improve the recordation, the research of deeds, all while making sure that privacy is respected? Because the laws have changed. For example, names have come off, social security numbers have come off of certain documents. So tell us a little bit how you would handle increased transparency and respect for privacy. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your question, Pascal. I was wondering when we were going to get to the clerk side of the office. And, you're absolutely right. There are, so many processes that are, automated, and much of this is sort of governed by other parts of the California law, more specifically the government code and others. So, our office has gone through and is continuing to go through this program where we are digitizing all of the records going back to the 1850s. So, part of what will make things, sort of easier, more accessible to people is getting all of those records actually digitized and then indexed. I would have to do more research on, some of the privacy concerns. I have not heard specifically about privacy concerns, but, I would say that, our recorders are available to help with that research. We have several books that go all through the office, and, our citizens are asking us all the time, hey, can you help me find this deed? Can you help me, sort of trace back what we think is property that our family has owned? So, I would say that, we continue to invest in sort of the tools we already have. We also have a great truncation program that we'll continue to carry out as we sort of digitize further. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert.
Okay, yes, on the clerk side of everything, privacy is obviously a concern. On the election side, it's much greater. As Natalie was saying, that they're going through a process of digitizing all the records, and of course, a lot of things are already on microfiche, and so as they convert that off, if we're needing to redact information that should not have been posted originally, then obviously that's something that we can address as we go through this process. But again, these will be systems that I'll be inheriting, and so without a greater understanding of where they are presently with their digitizing efforts and being able to redact out critical information, that's going to have to wait and see. But as a technologist, it's certainly an area where I have a lot of experience.
Thank you. Mr. Tedder.
So I think one of the things that have come out from the pandemic is we've really increased our reliance on electronic forms of communication, and I think that that's going to carry forward into recordation. And with that, with having that increased accessibility, of course, there's going to be privacy concerns. Of course, a lot of these things are, through statute, are made to be public record. And so trying to find that balance of accessibility and privacy is going to be very difficult. And as someone who's never worked in that office, it's going to be very difficult for me to completely answer that question. But I think the key to being successful to this thing is to doing exhaustive research and seeing what works out there and with other counties and collaborating with other people and having those moments where we can get together and really push this thing forward. I think another key to it is keeping and retaining our valued staff, making sure that they feel appreciated, making sure that they get cross-training so that we can build some of that, that collaborative spirit, and being able to understand exactly where the holes are in the accessibility and the transparency of these things. In a world where we were in fear of getting doxxed and things, we certainly need to address those privacy concerns. And the problem with this office is while you can influence policy, you can't set policy. So these are things that really have to come from the state and the people who voted in. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Adona, would you like rebuttal?
Just very quickly, I wanted to sort of provide a clarifying point. There's a mix of what's called public records and official records. So on the election side is public records, and I get these public records requests all of the time. On the clerk recorder side are official records. That means that they are not subject to a Public Records Act request. And, again, I have not heard specifically about any problems in our office about, any breach of privacy. We do have a Social Security truncation program and, a redaction program. I think it's worked really well. And if anyone has ever had any issue, we're more than welcome to help out.
Thank you. Would either of the other two candidates like to have rebuttal? Okay. We'll move on to the next question from the community. And Mr. Gilbert, you will be the first one to answer this. Do you believe that there was widespread voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election? If yes, please describe the occurrences you are aware of and what specific evidence supports your belief.
Fraud in the 2020 election. Well, again, there's many different types of fraud, and the fraud that I've been able to identify is the voter already voted. That is by far the biggest fraud. And that's a condition when 2 ballots arrive at the elections office. Sometimes it's because it was 2 mail-in ballots. Sometimes one was mailed in, and the other one is the people, deliver it in person. This is, by far the biggest problem that I have found out of the 2020 election. Now, I have other areas of concern, and they have to do with the election results themselves. And this is where transparency has been lost. I know the equipment, I have the technical manuals for it. I know the reports that it can produce, and I know why the county refuses to release certain records. And as long as those records are not being released for us to audit, do an independent citizens audit, then we can no longer have any confidence in those systems. And in fact, back in 2010, the state of California, as they were developing their plan, that was one of the issues, the lack of trust by the public in the black box voting equipment, where you cannot audit it. And that's where we actually, the requirement for a log became.
Thank you. Mr. Tedder.
I'm aware that there are a lot of people in my community and my country who feel cheated. And I'm also aware that there are a lot of people who disagree with that wholeheartedly. I think that it would be not worth the time to try and go back and resurrect what's happened in the past, honestly. I think that politics need to stay out of this. I think that these things need to be as apolitical as possible. I think that I believe in the rule of law, and many of these court cases have been tried unsuccessfully. I can't speak to what happened in the past. I'm much, much more focused on what I can do for you in the future, and that's honest, transparent elections. And I think that should be our focus. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Adona.
Thanks so much. Now, I am not naive. There is some level of fraud that happens across the United States. I myself had turned in 4 potential cases over to the Secretary of State and to the district attorney. So yes, some people try to stress test the system, but it is not widespread. There was no evidence that there was voter fraud on such a sort of mass level that it would have overturned any election result. I'd also, when I talk to people about this, sort of try to unpack this concept of fraud. I mean, what do we really mean? Do we mean in-person fraud, vote by mail fraud, actual cheating by people, and if so, by whom? Like I had said before, we have checks and balances that ensure that if someone tries to cheat, we catch them. Plus, we've got no unauthorized access to voting equipment. This is sort of not only laid out in the elections code, but it is laid out in the contract with the voting machine vendor. Our machines would get decertified if we had unauthorized access to the voting equipment. All of our equipment is federally and state certified. And if you have any questions, real questions, ask me the hard questions about voter fraud and what you think. Come to my office and see how we roll.
Thank you. So I'll go again to the media, and the first response will come from you, Mr. Tedder, and the question will come from the union.
Hello. Good to be in touch. Similar to the county's auditor, controller, and assessor, the clerk recorder is a position that performs a function with little to no policy involved. Why then should it be an elected office? And what does it mean to you to be chosen by your peers to represent, and even in minute things like paperwork?
Like I spoke to earlier, I think this is an opportunity for me to mend division, some of these things that we just heard about. There is strife out there, and regardless of where it comes from, people are discontent. And I know that's always going to happen to some degree, but if we can get someone elected who everybody trusts, I think that would go a long ways to bring some peace to what's going on in our country. And when I think of this job, I think of it as a liaison between the hired staff and the people. That's its real function and its real job. There's a whole room full of people who count the ballots and do the work, such as the assistant, who are supposed to be trained and understand the job in detail. The clerk recorder is supposed to be part of the checks and balances of our government to make sure that the people are getting represented fairly and that the elections are safe and being counted honestly. So I think that's where I'm coming from, is I think that I'm the kind of guy who gets along with everyone, and I want to be a person who speaks and represents everyone. And so I hope that I can mend that division by just being someone that you can trust, that you can put your ballot in the mail, you drop it off, and you forget all about it because you know that it's safe and it's being counted. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that question. Hopefully I've formulated an answer that, sort of addresses it head on. And I want to maybe push back a little bit on the notion that there's little to no policy involved in these offices. And it's true. I mean, we don't go up to Sacramento and make the laws, but we do have the responsibility as counties to interpret and then implement those laws. And so while, maybe policy at the state level isn't involved, we do set process. And that process is really important because the effects of those process actually trickle down to the experience of all of you. And I think that, you sort of feel the impact of that policy. If you were to look at, the state of California and, see how differently the offices implement these laws, at the county level, I mean, you will find that there's, little tweaks that happen here and there. That is the consequence of being a bottom-up state. Some states are top-down, where the state just sort of tells you what to do and, the jurisdictions do it. But in California, we do things a little bit differently. And I think that we're proud of that because it really gives us an opportunity to meet you all where you're at. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert.
Okay. Well, the positions that you had identified, they need to be elected positions. They need to be people that are responsive to the people and not to the Board of Supervisors. In the position of clerk, recorder, registrar of voters, you do serve as an expert witness for the board. And yes, in that position, you are implementing policy that has been handed down to you by the federal government, the state government, the Secretary of State. But in the end, we still have to manage those policies in such a manner that we're able to provide the service that we're required to do for the citizens, such as recording documents and holding elections. And so that's why it's important to be an elected position rather than an appointed position. You can eliminate a lot of the partisan politics that way.
Thank you. So the next question is from the community, and Ms. Adona, you will be the first to respond to this. What is your commitment to your community, and how have you demonstrated that commitment in the past?
I love this community. As soon as I got here, I was hitting the ground running. I think that I had maybe 2.5 weeks before I administered my first election here. And so, since the start, I have been working for y'all. And, then the March primary came along. I came to candidate forums like this to explain the somewhat painful process of presidential primaries. And then, as I'm fairly new here. I'm from California, but, I'd just sort of moved here and I thought, okay, let's get this election certified. I will go out there and, meet people and do everything. And then COVID, dang COVID, sort of put a halt to things. But, in a way, it sort of gave me a lot of energy and strength to make sure that you all were getting the services that you needed during this really difficult time for our country and for our community. And, the feedback that I've heard from the community for our office is largely positive, and people were scared. And, it was apparent in, sort of how everyone was so, sort of engaged and worried about what was going to happen in our office. So, yeah, I am looking forward to fully committing now that hopefully COVID is in our rearview mirror.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert.
Well, as a longtime resident of Nevada County, I've been here for 37 years, and I have served the community in various ways. I've been politically involved for as long as I can remember. In fact, the first thing I had to deal with was the reopening of the Banner Lava Cap mine, and becoming involved with that, to go through the planning process and making sure that the peoples were going to be protected for water and other issues. And that continued on throughout my career, even when I was working in Sacramento in the corporate world. I still managed to take time out to deal with issues such as NID and their big water pipelines. And then again, over the last decade, we've been having to deal with the cannabis issue, and I've been very involved in the planning process and all of the public events, and even right up into the elections thereon. So I've been very active in the community to make sure that this is a community that I want to live in. So,
Thank you. Mr. Tedder.
Yes, thank you. So I've been a lifelong volunteer, starting with my military career, where I went overseas to serve my community after 9/11. I think it's really important that you give back as much as possible. And after I got out of my military service, I came back and I joined several different boards: Welcome Home Vets, the American Legion, Nevada County All Veterans Stand Down, and I served as officer and board member to each of those. I also am a part of several different philanthropic organizations here in our town who continuously give back in various ways, such as the Native Sons of the Golden West. And I think also being a homeowner and raising a family here is an important indication of my dedication to staying in this community. We live in our dream home, and I don't plan on moving anytime soon. This is where I want to be. This is where I want to raise my family, and that investment is directly correlated to how successful this county is, and how successful I am in this job is related to that in turn. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next question will come again from KNCO, and Mr. Gilbert, you will be the first to respond.
Okay, do you think there should be any notable changes to the way the clerk recorder's office is run or set up?
a little bit of a loaded question there. Obviously, whatever changes are necessary will be ones that I will implement once I have a chance to really get to know the staff and the policies and procedures that they've been following. I've had the opportunity to be into the clerk recorder's office and need their assistance for searching documents and things like that. I've always been pleased with the service I've received, and I quite frankly can't see any big radical changes that I'm going to want to make in that regard. I think that the biggest thing is ensuring that the office will always be accessible to the people at all times, and the office would only be closed if there's a natural disaster, or in the case, a snowmageddon, and the county executive officer feels that it's in the safety and best interest of everyone to shut down the office. And but other than that, I don't see any radical changes that I'm going to be making.
Thank you. Mr. Tedder.
As far as the clerk recorder, I think that making sure that there's some good safety protocols. If our local clerk recorders are feeling nervous about our public interactions, then we need to instill some good training and security processes that keep them safe and make them feel safe when they go to work. I think that's a real part that's important to attracting and retaining qualified and good staff, so we can keep them on board and keep the workflow going really well. I mean, physical changes in the office, I would also like to see the chapel a little more inviting. It's such a wonderful moment to get married, and I know it could use a little sprucing up, in my opinion. But again, the function of the office, I've heard from the people who interface with the office, they feel pretty good about it. The people who go in there all the time and work with the ladies that work there and the gentleman that works there. So I hope that we can keep that going forward and always look for ways to improve it.
Thank you. Ms. Adona.
Thanks so much. So we did receive, sort of a lot of feedback these past few years, especially with COVID, because there's just some things that never cross your mind, like, how small an office is. So, one of the things that I would do to seek to improve things, the vote by mail operation has become pretty big. We have over 75,000 registered voters. And so our ballot room is just, sort of very small. And, Nevada County, you're sort of really taking advantage of, this opportunity to turn your home into a ballot booth. So, I would, sort of try to sort of rethink that space a little bit. Certainly, even though, our recorders and our elections people get along pretty well, they're sort of feeling a little crunched up there. So, I want to be able to address those concerns. We also got some feedback about, the ability of observers to come in and see the operation. So one of the improvements that we've actively made, we have this great big window where you can sort of look in and see, what's happening in the ballot room. And I think that's an overall positive, as we could only fit a few people at a time without everyone sort of piling up on each other. And, I do want to acknowledge that, there is a trend across the state, across this nation, around, election officials being targeted. So while I don't want to create this fortress here in Nevada County, because we are really friendly here, I also think that people should feel safe when they come to work.
Thank you. All right, so the next question will be one from the community, and oh yes, you may. Please do.
Oh, thank you. So I understood the question was about the clerk recorder half of the office, and we've given it so little love. I assumed we were talking about that. Of course, there is lots of room for improvement on the other side of the house. I think there's way too much cluttered space in there. We really need to open up that office. We need to push that center room that she spoke about all the way to the back wall. We need to get some better cameras in there where you can actually see what's going on. You can't log on and see what's going on. The poll workers are poll watchers are 25 feet away from the poll workers. They ought to be able to observe those things. It's a constitutional right to be able to see those things. And adding more windows and more security if necessary to keep that isolation so that the ballots are safe and that the staff is safe, that may be something we consider. But we definitely need to open that office up. That would then lend a lot of credibility to the idea that we're trying to be absolutely transparent. Thank you.
Thank you. Would either of the other two candidates wish to have rebuttal as well? Ms. Adona.
Thanks so much. And, I will sort of be perfectly honest. One of the pieces of feedback that we got from the grand jury was, maybe some of the observers in the November 2020 election were a little bit further away than they needed to be. And I actually agree with that. We do have laws that, sort of articulate what kind of discretion the election official has and what is absolutely prohibited. But, one of the reasons why we put in the window and one of the reasons why we are, sort of updating our training is to accommodate for that, because at the time people were really scared. Unfortunately, we can't push the operation too far back because our kitchen is in there and people need to, have a place to eat and take a break. And, just on the cameras, we did install new cameras because they were pretty old. So we got some new ones and hopefully they'll work out a little bit better. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert, would you like rebuttal?
Yeah. Well, again, they both have brought up interesting points, but again, in order to do some of these things, the budget will have to be prepared because obviously Jason is talking about doing expansion, and that takes some thought. Natalie has pointed out that there's going to be some issues if we try to do that. So again, this is why I'm refraining from making decisions about what kinds of changes I would be making until I'm actually in there, and then after I have an opportunity to observe this election and some of the issues that have just been brought up here for me to be aware of, and will help me then formulate just how I might proceed should I be elected.
Thank you. So our next question is also from the community, and Mr. Tedder, you will be the first to respond. Some voters expressed concern about chain of custody for ballots in the last election. What standards do you think are appropriate for the chain of custody, and how would you ensure that such standards are followed?
I think that one of the things that the other counties do that's really good and lends credibility again and transparency to our elections is that they have sheriffs go and pick up the ballots from the vote centers and from the ballot boxes. I would like to have a sheriff go out with the poll watchers and the poll workers, who are trained highly in chain of custody already, to get further training in chain of custody of the ballots, and then take those ballots and put them in the back of their police cars, which have GPS tracking and that are in live time. Bringing those things back to the office directly so that we know exactly where those ballots are at all times, and being observed by those nonpartisan, impartial workers. I think that that'd be very important to help lend itself to the transparency of this election. And I know that there's some costs involved with that, but I think that this office has celebrated a lot of surplus. Right now there's about 700 grand sitting in the extra cash accounts. So paying for that officer would go a long ways towards making people feel good about this election, and I think it's a worthwhile expenditure. Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Adona.
Thanks so much. So we train everybody on sort of strict chain of custody rules. So there's sort of two components that are really important on the chain of custody. One is the ballots, and the other is voting equipment. So, I conduct all of the training myself, and I have sort of vastly improved how we train our workers. So we have security seals on all sensitive parts of the voting equipment and anything that is protecting ballots. We do give our vote center workers very sort of detailed instructions and easy to follow guides on how to ensure an unbroken chain of custody. And, the training is ongoing. This goes on for every election. We also do stress the importance of having 2 people at least with all ballots and all voting equipment. I don't know of the specific incident that's being referred to. I would hope that people would come to me if there was an issue. And we stress every time, and you can see it in my training materials, you can see it in the vote center manual. I noticed that some of the people in here have actually served as vote center workers, and they will know that I am a pretty big stickler for that chain of custody. And, it's all comes down to training, 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 and knowing why the policy is what it is. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, on the issue of chain of custody, we actually have two separate issues. Actually, I brought up a third one, actually. We have our chain of custody issues that's happening with the equipment. We have our chain of custody with the ballots once they are received at the elections office or at a vote center. But we also have another area of chain of custody, and this area has been completely broken. And it's this one, it happens through the post office. When you take your ballot and you drop it in the mailbox, are you given a tracking number? Can you track that actual envelope as it goes through the system? No, unless you personally put tracking on it. So that right there, that ballot, the minute you drop it into that mailbox, you've lost your chain of custody on it. From there on out, who knows what's happening to it? Now, as far as once you get it to the elections office, as long as we have strong policies and procedures on following, having multiple eyes on every part of the process, then we should be able to maintain a good chain of custody on all of the ballots. When I worked in the elections office back in '96, we didn't have a problem with chain of custody, and I'm sure that if I'm running the show, we're not going to have any problems with it as well, because I'm a stickler for it, because I used to have to deal with chain of custody on legal documents.
Thank you. Ms. Sedona, you would like rebuttal?
Yes, please. Just a couple of comments. So I'm a little confused by the $700K in surplus. All of our money in elections comes from the general fund. So I would be curious to see what document maybe had that, and wonder if it's a county document. The second thing is, with the sort of issue of chain of custody with the U.S. Postal Service. I mean, obviously, I don't work for the Postal Service, but I do want to let voters know that there are a couple of tools that they can use in order to track their ballot if they want to. So there is a tool called Ballot Tracks, and it actually allows you to sign up and know when your ballot is on the way and when it has been received by the elections office. The USPS also has something called informed delivery, so you can sort of see what's on the way in your mailbox. So you do have a couple of tools, and if you ever have a question, give us a call. We'll make it right.
Mr. Gilbert?
Yes. On the U.S. Post Office Service, informed delivery only tells you when a package is coming to you, and so unless you're signing up for an additional service to track a package that you've have set up, that's not going to exist. So, once you put it in the mail, you have lost your chain of custody until it arrives at the elections office, and then their chain of custody procedures then kick in. So that's my biggest problem with the vote by mail problem. I know that we do have a lot of people that had been using our absentee system, but again, even back then, it wasn't, technically could have been an issue for those people that were concerned about chain of custody. So that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Tedder, would you like to?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So I was referring to the CEO's budget report that was produced by the county. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next question, Ms. Sedona will respond first, and it will come from Ubinet.
We just talked about chain of custody. You talked about how many people you want to bring ballots safely and securely to the elections office. For that, you need both temporary workers and volunteers. Could you please, all of you, how can you get more volunteer, temporary poll workers, field inspectors, whatever you call them? How is your outreach? And do you have any strategy to actually get younger people interested in actually volunteering? Because no offense to the audience, but most of us have pretty gray hair here. So how are you going to bring younger people in to actually get a taste of democracy like that?
I really appreciate that question, Pascal. Thank you. And, for the record, I value all of our volunteers. Come in young, maybe a little bit more seasoned. That's perfectly all right with me. So just on the issue of recruitment, I think that we do pretty well on recruitment. It's always a bit of a challenge, particularly because we have vote centers that open starting 10 days before the election and then 4 days, and I think a lot of people are sort of used to that one-day model. But as we all know, voting takes place over several days, and sometimes it's sort of hard to get people. We've been really fortunate here to have a group of vote center workers that return every single year, and they're really experienced. They do sometimes try to hijack my class and teach me, and I have to sort of say, okay, well, let's sort of get back to the ground here. But on the issue of getting more young people engaged, I 100% agree that that's something that we could sort of definitely improve on. We have sort of gone back and forth with Sierra College, and have sort of started to engage young people, and I think that it is a sort of hard nut to crack. If someone has figured it out, please let me know. I know about 100 election officials who would like to know that answer as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert.
Yes, getting volunteers to perform a service is always a challenge. No matter what it is, the elections have been able to sufficiently, at least in my opinion, I've been able to recruit enough people to become involved. It's one of those things, not everybody has the time to be able to make the commitment, because it is a commitment to be civically involved. And I can only hope that over the course of time that I'm able to foster that love of giving back to the community by volunteering, and over time we'll be able to see if I'm able to achieve that. And like Natalie said, if you know any secrets, I'll be more than glad to listen to you, because I certainly don't have the magic 8 ball to tell us what it's going to take to find the people that have the drive and stamina to take on a task such as running an election or working in an election.
Thank you. Mr. Tedder.
Pizza sounds good. So having worked in a lot of volunteer organizations where it's always a problem. It's always a problem trying to get people to come in and do things. And I think the key to it is making sure that those people are appreciated, making sure that they have work that's dedicated to them, so that they have something that's personal, and they have this thing that they know that, because people volunteer, they want to do something. And I think a lot of times we get volunteers and they kind of stand around and mill about and they're not sure, and then you lose them right away. So being able to manage those kind of groups is important, and having that understanding of what's driving them to be there in the first place. Looking for volunteers. We're coming into that digital age still, I think, some of us. So I think there's great opportunities out there, like with Indeed. I know we've been able to solicit a lot of volunteers through that organization. Putting out ads on YouTube are really powerful. I think maybe sponsoring an apprenticeship program through the schools, to where some of the college students might get some college credit to come out and be apprentices, and to learn about government policy and government procedure, and whether it's for civics or for their government class, or I think that'd be a great step to encourage some of these students to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so the next question is also from the community. In 2020 elections, voters reported being intimidated as they approached the Rood Center ballot drop-off box. If elected, how will you handle the election ballot drop-off box locations? And Mr. Gilbert, you are the first to
Yeah.
respond to this.
Well, I personally had not heard about an event where people were feeling threatened until another forum a few weeks back. That was the first time I'd heard about it. Obviously, if somebody is in violation of the various rules about how far you're supposed to stay away from an election place, obviously we can then have security come out and ask the people to remove themselves to the appropriate distance, but you can't stop them from, getting their opinion out there as long as they do it outside the zone. It is unfortunate that an incident like that happened, and I definitely wouldn't want to see it happen on my watch. But if it does, then I will address it as it happens. It's one of those things. I don't know if you can be fully prepared for it. I mean, what more can I do? Put up cameras, security guards, manning these places at all times. I don't know if that's always practical. So the best we can do is when there's during the daylight hours, when there's that possibility of there being a crowd surrounding a particular drop box location, then we'll have to address that with security as needed.
Thank you. Mr. Tedder.
So I think this is one of the things that we've really struggled with as a country for a long time, is trying to balance our First Amendment rights with feeling safe with our voting. So it's a tricky thing. I think we need to look carefully at where these ballot boxes are, and personally, being right in front of the sheriff's office feels like a pretty safe place for me. Of course, we have to be proactive and maybe a little more vigilant about going out and monitoring these things so that we can be apprised of those situations, and if people are getting unruly and they are starting to intimidate voters, that we take action immediately and go out there and push them back and inform them of the law and make sure that everybody gets access to the box. One of the problems that I would take issue with is if we set up certain barriers or restrictions that might dissuade other people from voting. So, it's always about balancing, taking rights from one group and giving it to another. So I think that's a really difficult question, and I think that's something that's going to have to be answered on the spot as it happens. And I'd wonder about the prevalence. We know of one instance, and I know it's terrible and it should never happen, but does that happen a lot? Does it happen everywhere? And how much time and money should we focus on something that may be not that common?
Thank you. Ms. Adona.
Thanks so much. I want to unpack this concept of voter intimidation. It's not simply feeling intimidated or, sort of something internal to you, but in fact, it is things that can be observed. So, when I conduct my training classes, voter intimidation is observable, and it comes in the form of actually, blocking somebody from voting, blocking somebody from using a drop box, posting yourself in a uniform and saying that you're a police officer when you're not, persuading people not to vote. These are all, sort of observable things, and I remember the incident that's being referred to. In my mind, any one example of voter intimidation is unacceptable because, I think that, Mr. Tedder's absolutely right. You do have to balance the First Amendment rights with your right to vote. And the rule on no electioneering is specifically sort of set up as a policy to create a buffer zone around the entrance to a voting location, around a drop box, and around elections headquarters. So I think the way to address this is sort of multi-layered. Work with the county parties and community groups on what the deadlines are, and with the police on where the voting locations are, so if someone calls in with a problem, they know what they're responding to.
Thank you. So our next question will come from the union, and Mr. Tedder, you will respond first.
Hello. I am actually really bad at just asking one question, so I'm gonna ask three, and we're gonna go for like a gist. This circles back to the first question that was asked. How do you avoid a situation like what happened in January 2021 when the election was so politicized that the system itself, the process, was questioned? How can the office maintain ethos in the age of misinformation? And what is the elections office role if people are just in disbelief of majority opinion? Sorry. Yeah, like basically, how do you establish ethos, like as an office that's just oriented around process, when the country, the nation, the county is so fractured that people on one end just can't possibly believe the majority on the other? Does that make sense? Like, what is kind of the role of the elections office there?
So it was kind of a complicated question, but I think I know what you mean. I think the most important thing is that we have an office that is as non-political as possible. Someone who doesn't really side strongly with either side, someone who doesn't make political statements, someone who doesn't align themselves with certain political ideologies, someone that leaves that stuff at the door when they get in the office. Of course, I've seen in my lifetime that depending on which way things swing, you have people who are going to be upset no matter what. The difference being in this time is that over the last few elections, there have been outrageous fighting and accusations and court cases and really divisive type behavior where people aren't even willing to talk. And I think going back to what I was saying earlier, there's a reason why this office is supposed to be nonpartisan, and making sure that that person always, in public and in private, is someone who does their best to be neutral on these things, because you kind of lose your ability to take certain stances when you take one of these offices, because people look up to you as a leader. And you need to make sure that you're as neutral as possible, because everything that you say and believe is a reflection of the office that you hold. And I think that's the key, is just making sure that we put people that everybody trusts, not just one party, not just one kind of person, everybody trusts. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Adona.
I think I understand your question. I'm gonna do my best, and if I don't, we can talk offline. So, I think the ethos that you're referring to is actually already built into the law, and it's sort of inherent in the professionalism of being an election official. There are election officials across this state that are, Democrats, Republicans, or, no party preference like myself, or, sort of have other political affiliations. But what we all have in common is our commitment to following the law and creating process and rules that conform with the law. I often say that, my job is not to try to sort of change somebody's worldview on anything, because, frankly, I already have a full-time job. But what I will do and what I can guarantee is that I will lead with what is truthful, and I will lead with facts. One of the things that our office is trying to do, and we're sort of developing a sort of communication strategy and plan to sort of get ahead of the mis and disinformation, and hopefully to pre-bunk what bad information is out there. The unfortunate thing is sometimes I hear about it and it's already all over the Twitters. But I hope that over time we can address that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert.
Well, Ever since 2016, I thought, for me, that clearly was when things became fractured in the vote. Things became very polarized at that time in my eyes. And while it's impossible to please everybody, obviously, the 2016 and the 2020 elections, can say that there's a lot of people that walked away disappointed, regardless of which side you were on. And so it really becomes incumbent upon the elections office to demonstrate that we're being completely nonpartisan. We pay no favoritism to either political party. It is all about the process. This is a process of providing free and fair elections for the people. And so as long as the elections office can demonstrate to the people that they're being nonpartisan, I think that goes a long way in being able to, even though they may not be happy with it, if we show them the evidence that we ran it in a free and fair manner with full transparency, we should be able to alleviate their concerns. But again, it goes back to the vote logs themselves. If the piece of hardware is producing a log that the people cannot see and cannot do an independent evaluation of it, then the people will never have any faith in that equipment to produce an accurate tally. And as long as they have no confidence in the machine's ability to produce an accurate tally, we're always going to have strife.
Thank you. So I believe we have time for one more question, maybe two. We'll go ahead and get started with this. This one is from the community, and we'll start with Ms. Adona. Do you believe Nevada County's adoption of the Voters' Choice Act is an improvement to our elections, and why?
Thanks so much, and absolutely. I think it was great to move to the Voters' Choice Act. We have more convenience for voters. I mean, I think the operative word here is choice. You have the option to receive your ballot in the mail, vote at home if you'd like. You can use the U.S. mail. You can use one of our many drop boxes that are located in the county. You can vote in person. Really, you don't have any limitations as to, how you participate. The only decision that voters want to make is, whether they're going to participate, and I hope you all do. And, Nevada County has some really high voter turnout. It only improved since the adoption of the Voters' Choice Act. More people are voting in this county, and over time, it has saved the county money. We don't have to spend all kinds of money on labor processing provisionals because there are way fewer provisionals. We don't have as many locations, and we certify our elections probably about 2.5 weeks, which is well ahead of the 30-day deadline. So I think all in all, it's helping voters, it's helping our office, and it's an overall good.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert.
The Voter Choice Act certainly does give us plenty of new options. Voting by mail, voting in person, which we've always had. For me, personally, I think one of the best parts of it was the ability to extend the vote over multiple days. It really eliminates that crunch of, okay, I got to be here on that day, and I'm going to miss work or whatever, and by having it spread over a week or 10 days, it gives more people that opportunity to come in person. I personally recommend that everybody should vote in person. But for those people that want to use the vote by mail process, yeah, it's there for you. That's what the choices are all about. But again, unfortunately, the Voter Choice Act has demonstrated to us through the vote by mail process that the opportunity for fraud is there, and we have, through the voter already voted issue, demonstrated that vote by mail does have its problems, and we have to come up with a better solution to eliminate that problem.
Thank you. Mr. Tedder.
So I kind of approach things from a scientific kind of method, and I think when we start introducing too many variables too quickly, we lose the ability to track of what the effects are. And I have a concern about that, and being the guinea pig of these programs over and over again in our county. I've looked at the budget and the claim that that it's saving us money. It seems that it's saving us money in some ways, but adding money in other ways. So I think the net balance wasn't that much of a savings at all, if negligible, if anything. With those additional variables, there's also potential for fraud, and I think we don't have enough information about how these things work to be able to track that fraud. I hope that those things aren't happening, and I think there's additional ways to go back to the statutes and safeguard the elections through just following good procedure and doing the things that we've done in the past. And I'm usually the kind of guy to, if it works, why fix it? I think that reinventing the wheel every few years might be a mistake. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Adona, you would like rebuttal?
Yes, please. So I wanted to address a couple of things. So, like I said, there are some people who try to stress test the system, but there aren't many. I can count them on one hand for each of the elections that I have served. As far as the voter already voted, I mean, I would have to sort of check back at the paperwork, but I think it was something in the 2020 election, like 20 people. We didn't count any of those votes. They were all cast provisionally because we get real-time updates in the voter history being connected through VoteCal that the voter already voted, so none of those counted. But like I said, people try to stress test the system. And yes, parts of our budget did go up, but not as a result of the Voters' Choice Act. In 2019, the Secretary of State at the time had decertified all voting equipment in California. We had to buy new voting equipment. That's why I worked so hard to get those reimbursements from the state. We also, had COVID. That really increased the cost of elections. Happy to answer any other questions about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would either of the other two candidates like rebuttal? Okay, so we will move on to closing statements. You'll each have 2 minutes, and we will start with Ms. Adona.
Thanks so much. First of all, thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting together such an awesome night and discussion. I'm so encouraged by all of you who have come here, and to whoever's watching, thank you for participating, and to anyone who's going to stream it later, thanks so much for taking the time to do that for this important office. I would just reiterate the importance of having an experienced professional in this office, not only because we are the custodians of your sensitive records like birth certificates, death certificates, marriages, which are a great fun part of my day when I get to perform them, and elections. I think that you should have a good experience when you have these major sort of life milestones, and our office is part of that. I also, as I had said before, do believe that our democracy is a tapestry, and election officials keep that tapestry from fraying. I understand that there are people who want to come in elections, and I welcome that. I think that there's so much to learn, and for me in my very first election back in 2007, 2008, I remember looking at that and feeling very overwhelmed by it, and I was so thankful to have people knowledgeable, passionate, experienced at the helm to shepherd me through it. And I mean, in closing, I just love this community. I love how engaged you are. I want to see Nevada County continue to have high turnout, high engagement, and enjoy coming to forums like this where you actually get a chance to learn about the candidates and then vote. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And now we will hear a closing statement from Mr. Gilbert.
Well, thank you to the League of Women Voters for having us tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody, and I'm grateful that everybody has asked us some very good questions. I'm looking forward to serving you in the role of Clerk Recorder, Registrar of Voters, and bringing you honest, transparent elections. The transparency in our elections is absolutely paramount, and I feel very strongly about that. And I look forward to working with all the volunteers that will be making that possible to hold these free and fair elections. And there are other aspects of the job that I'm looking forward to, and Ms. Adona has touched on one of them, performing marriages. I think marriage is one of the most sacred things that two humans can engage in, and I actually look forward to performing my first marriage. So I just hope that the people will see me as a viable candidate to bring around change if they feel that change is necessary. And in those areas where we don't need to have change because the system is already working so well, that I'll be able to maintain that. And so again, I'm here to serve you and bringing you the service that you deserve and need to run your businesses, your lives, as well as the elections. So thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you. And now we'll hear a closing statement from Mr. Tedder.
Thank you very much. And thank you, League of Women Voters, for having this venue for us again. I want to say what I think is pretty obvious at this point, that I think this office has become far too political. I want to note that it's not a requirement to run for this office to have been worked in or served in that capacity already. I think it's because this is supposed to be those checks and balances that I mentioned earlier. And this is the kind of job you learn through on-the-job training. From the words of a clerk recorder who worked here recently, this is not rocket science. I used to work on rockets. I can manage this. I have the ability. I have the compassion for managing people attentively and respectfully. I have the eagerness to learn and the want to do an excellent job, and willingness to open books and look at the regulations. I'm very, very good at the black and white. I excel at doing things the right way every single time, regardless of how well I think I know the process. I think that this office could really benefit from my leadership skills and retaining good, qualified people to run this office. I would just be the overseer. And that's the point, the liaison between the clerk's office and the people. The most important thing to me is to deliver excellent customer service by being engaged and accessible. I put my number in the union, my phone number. I'm inviting all of you to talk to me anytime, and that will continue on into my service. I have my opinions, but I can leave them at the door. I am dedicated to this community. My support comes from here. I am known and respected in Nevada County. I've been endorsed by 2 of the supervisors who are actively sitting on the board, and 2 more who are former supervisors, local businesses and organizations and PACs in our county, along with a varied amounts of people, men and women with different political backgrounds and lifestyles, that all support me. And I'm looking forward to serving you if you elect me, and I would be honored to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our media partners and also NC Media for recording and streaming this event. I want to thank the timekeepers for keeping us on track this evening, and the audience for your courtesy and the excellent questions. And I especially would like to thank the candidates for being here tonight and answering all of these questions for us. Thank you so much. We can.
And thank you for your first time moderating. Great job.
Oh, thank you, and we'll see you at the next forum.